Lillian sat in the same armchair her husband built for her 40 years ago. The cushion had flattened, but the memory hadn't. In her lap rested a sealed envelope, cream-colored. Neatly labeled in her handwriting, "Last Will and Testament." The morning sun slipped through the lace curtains, casting patterns on the hardwood floor. She traced the envelope's edge with her finger. Slowly, gently, the way you touch. Something that once held meaning. It had been exactly 13 months since she last heard from her. Grandchildren, not a call, not a birthday. Card. Not even a forwarded chain. Email. They blocked her number. Quietly, without explanation. At first, she thought it was an accident, a mistake that would soon be fixed. But weeks passed. Then holidays. Then her birthday. And the silence spoke louder than words ever could. Now, today, after all that silence, came a message from her eldest granddaughter. "Grandma, where's the will?" "We were just wondering." Lillian smiled, just slightly. Not out of bitterness, not out of victory, but because life, in its own cruel poetry, always came back around. She didn't text back. She just sat there, listening to the clock tick, holding the envelope, the one none of them knew she still had. And for the first time in a while, she didn't feel invisible. The phone sat on the kitchen counter, humming with silence. Lillian had charged it overnight, just in case someone remembered. Her birthday had always been a family affair. Even after Harold passed, the kids had kept the tradition going. The grandkids used to fight over who got to hold the cake. There would be laughter, too much frosting, off-key singing. She never asked for much. Just a phone call, card, a slice of presents. But this year, nothing at 9 a.m. She texted Emily, "Hope you're doing well, sweetheart. Just wanted to say hi." No reply. At 11 a.m., she tried Liam, "Thinking of you today. Miss you again." Nothing by 2 p.m. The quiet started to feel personal, so she called first Emily straight to voicemail, then Liam. 1. Ring voicemail. She dialed again, slower this time. Still no answer. Her fingers trembled. She opened the message thread with Emily. The usual blue bubbles from past years stared back at her like ghosts. Then she tried to send one more message. "Just wanted to hear your voice today." It sent as green dot. She blinked. Tried again. Green dot blocked. The word wasn't written. But she felt it. Blocked. She stood there, still holding the phone, like if she didn't move. Maybe the truth wouldn't land. But it already had. Her thumb hovered over the screen, frozen. She wasn't tech-savvy, but she knew what it meant. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake. It was a door. Closed, she sat down in the living room, phone resting useless in her lap, and reached for the old photo album under the coffee table. The one with peeling plastic pages and little notes written in pen. Emily's first piano recital. Liam's 8th birthday. Superhero theme. She flipped slowly, page by page. Memory by memory. Her lips trembled as she lingered on a photo from a snowy siege. December, Emily sitting on her lap, cheeks pink from the cold, grinning with her front teeth missing. Lillian had knit that scarf herself. Back then, she was more than just grandma. She was their safe place, their warmth, their soft landing. She had held them through fevers, nightmares, growing pains, breakups. She had read bedtime stories twice when they asked, 3 times when they begged. She had never, not once, missed a single holiday. Until they stopped showing up first. They said they were busy. Finals, work, travel. She understood. Life moves fast. People grow up. But then came the year when no one said anything at all. No message, no excuse. Just nothing. She looked around the room. The birthday card from the pharmacy sat unopened on the table. The only one she'd received. It came with her medication refill, a generic happy birthday. In bubbly letters, no name signed inside. Just a BARCODE. She had put it up on the mantel anyway. For decor. For denial. A sound escaped her lips. Not quite a sob. Not quite a sigh. She wiped her eyes and stood up, steadying herself on the armrest. As she put the photo album back in its place, something inside her shifted. Not broken, just moved. She looked at the phone one last time. Not in anger, not in desperation, but in quiet. Settled, knowing they had made their choice. And soon she would make hers. The table was set for 6. Lillian hadn't cooked much, just enough. A modest turkey breast, 2 side dishes, and her signature pumpkin pie with a touch of clove. She placed cloth napkins beside the plates. Ironed them that morning. The silverware didn't shine like it used to, but she laid it out anyway. Just in case someone changed their mind. The house smelled like cinnamon and sage. Soft jazz played on the old radio. Outside, the world was gray. Leaves blowing against the porch rail like memories that didn't quite settle. She glanced at the clock. 2:17 p.m. dinner was supposed to be at 2. No messages. No calls. No distant voice saying, "Running late, Grandma." She walked to the front door, peeked through the curtains. The street was still. No headlights. No shoes on the mat. No familiar voices walking up the steps. Only wind and quiet. She turned off the radio. The silence filled every corner of the house. Back in the dining room. She stood for a moment looking at the empty chairs. Each one had a story. One had a crack from Liam's wiggly tooth days. He used to lean back too far. Another still had a faint glitter spot from Emily's craft project years ago. She used to say glitter was fairy dust that never left. Lillian sat down slowly. The turkey grew cold. The pie remained untouched. She poured herself a cup of cider. Tried to hum something under her breath. Couldn't remember the tune. Couldn't swallow the lump sitting in her chest. And then a knock at the door. It was Cheryl, her neighbor, holding a covered dish and wearing a knitted hat with a pom-pom on top. Thought you might not want to eat alone. Cheryl said. Lillian blinked. She hadn't told anyone she was cooking. She stepped aside. You're right on time. They sat together, plates balanced on their laps. Eating in the living room where the fire was low and the silence no longer felt so sharp. Cheryl talked about her cat. Lillian nodded along, smiling politely. She didn't say much, but she listened. Really listened. After dinner, Cheryl helped put the dishes away. They wrapped the pie in foil. Still untouched. At the door, Cheryl paused. You know, families can be strange. Lillian nodded. Yes, they can. When the door closed behind her, Lillian stood in the hallway for a long while. Then walked back to the dining room. She blew out the candles, folded the napkins, stacked the empty plates, and as she turned off the light, she realized something. This year, her family's absence hadn't broken her. It had clarified her. Love doesn't vanish, but it can retreat. And sometimes, the clearest thing a person can do is stop waiting for the doorbell. The morning after Thanksgiving, Lillian made tea instead of coffee. The kind her husband used to drink, strong, black, with just a squeeze of lemon. She hadn't brewed it in years. But something about yesterday lingered in the air. Like a song that wouldn't quite leave the room. She sat down at the small desk in the corner of her bedroom, pulled out a yellow notepad, the one with the slightly frayed corner, clicked her favorite pen, and she began to write. Dear Emily, Liam, and Jonah, I don't know why you stopped answering. Maybe it was accidental at first. Maybe it wasn't. But I've spent the last year wondering if I'd done something unforgivable. Her handwriting was steady, delicate. I raised you while your parents worked overtime shifts. I held your hands through every flu, every heartbreak, every first day of school. I watched you become curious and kind. And I was proud, so proud even when I didn't say it enough. She paused. The kettle ticked behind her. The heat rising from the mug curled upward like breath. I don't want you to feel guilt when you read this. That's not why I'm writing. I'm writing because I miss you. I miss your noise. I miss your mess. I miss the feeling of being needed by someone I love. She wrote 4 pages, 6 in total. About Christmas mornings. About Jonah's first steps. About the time Emily made her a bracelet out of dry pasta. I don't need gifts. I don't even need apologies. I just needed honesty. And you never gave me that. When she reached the end, her hand trembled slightly. "Love, always, Grandma." She read it once, then again, then folded it carefully and slid it into a small envelope. She didn't seal it. Instead, she walked to her bedside table, opened the drawer, and pulled out her journal, the dark brown one with her initials stamped in gold. She slid the letter. Inside, Dot then reached for a sticky note and wrote, in block letters, "Read this again before forgiving." She pressed the note onto the envelope, then closed the journal gently. That afternoon, she went up to the attic. The light was dim and dusty, but she knew exactly which box to pull down. Ben's letters her late husband had written to her almost every week during his 2 years stationed overseas. They used to read them together when the grandkids were little, but as they got older, no one asked anymore. She opened the first envelope. The paper had yellowed, but the ink was still bold. "My dearest Lil, if you're reading this, it means another week has passed and I still love you more than the one before. The days are long here, but I carry your laugh in my pocket. That's how I survive." She read until her eyes blurred. Ben had always known how to say what mattered, even when the world didn't want to hear it. She set the letter down, her hand resting on it as if to keep it from floating away. It was in that moment she realized the love she built was real. It didn't vanish because people forgot. It didn't lose value because someone blocked a number. It lived in ink, Dot, in memory, in her. Lillian was dusting the living room shelf when her daughter casually said it as if she were discussing the weather. "They said they'll probably use the inheritance for a down payment. Somewhere out near the lake." Lillian didn't turn around. She kept dusting the photo of her and Ben at their 40th anniversary dinner, the one where he wore a tux and she wore lipstick too bright. For her age, the words floated through the room like pollen, uninvited, airy, invisible inheritance, her daughter had said, as if Lillian were already gone, as if her death was a future spreadsheet, already bookmarked. She moved to the next frame, a picture of her 3 grandkids, all in elementary school then. Their faces were open, joyful. Back when they fought over who got to sit in Grandma's lap. Back when they used to call. She nodded slightly, just enough to let her daughter think she'd heard. But she said nothing. That evening, after dinner, Lillian cleaned the kitchen slowly, methodically. She dried each fork with care, wiped the counter twice. She wasn't stalling, not exactly, just bracing. When the house went quiet, she walked down the hall to her bedroom and closed the door. Then she reached for the floorboard. It creaked the same way it always had. Even after all these years, she pulled it up gently, revealing the small safe built into the space beneath her dresser. The key hung from a ribbon. Tucked in her Bible, she opened the safe. Her fingers steady, her breath held. Inside, nothing had changed. The document sat where it always had, crisp, notarized, and signed in blue ink, "Last Will and Testament, Lillian May Richards, original, do not alter." She lifted it gently and sat on the edge of her bed. Her eyes scanned the page, though she'd read it dozens of times. It was clear, unmistakable. Everything, the house, the savings, the small lake property she and Ben had bought in '94, was left to her only surviving granddaughter. Sarah, not Emily, not Jonah, not Liam. Sarah, the quiet one. The only one who never blocked her number. The only one who still sent cards, even if she forgot the stamp sometimes. There was a clause in the will, too. Ben had insisted on it. Should any named beneficiary engage in financial coercion, emotional manipulation, or attempt to preclaim inheritance prior to the legal death of the executor, they shall be removed as beneficiary in full. She stared at those words. She remembered the day they added that clause. Ben had looked at her, serious, and said, "We protect our future by honoring our past. No one pressures you while I'm gone." And now they had. They didn't ask. They didn't include. They didn't check. They just assumed. They'd written her off in group chats she wasn't part of. Whispered to each other like her walls weren't thin. Tossed around words like simplify and legacy and when the time comes. As if her time belonged to them, Lillian folded the will and placed it back in the safe. This time, she locked it with a small but satisfying click. Then she stood up and looked at herself in the mirror. She didn't see a dying woman. She saw someone they didn't expect to still be watching, still remembering, still deciding they don't even think. "I'm a person anymore," she whispered. But she was, and the paper in that safe. That was proof, not just of her assets, but of her voice, of her right to choose, of her power to remind them. She was still here. It happened on a Tuesday, the quiet kind. The kind where the kettle whistles louder than it should and the ticking clock feels like an audience. Lillian had just poured her second cup of tea when her phone vibrated a number she didn't recognize. Out-of-state area code? She hesitated. Most of her calls these days were spam charities or urgent offers about a warranty on a car she hadn't owned in 11 years. But something nudged her thumb to swipe. One message. 5 lines. No greeting. "Grandma, are you mad at us? We haven't heard anything about the will. Did something happen? Everyone's confused. Please let me know." It was from Emily, her oldest granddaughter. The one who used to braid Lillian's hair on Sunday afternoons. The same one who hadn't spoken to her since last spring. Not for Easter. Not for the 4th of July. Not even for her birthday. Not even a card. Lillian sat still, staring at the screen. No "Hi, Grandma." No "How are you?" No mention of the silence they'd kept, like a vow. Just the will. Just the money. Just the part where she was supposed to answer to them. She reread the message. Her tea had gone cold. But she didn't move. She only stared at the words, at the tone, at the gap where love should have lived. She hadn't changed her number. She hadn't moved. She hadn't hidden. And yet they had vanished from her world, not by distance, but by choice. They blocked her number. They ignored her invitations. They replaced her presence with speculation, and now they acted confused, like this silence was something that had happened to them. She rose, walked to the back porch, and sat with the message still glowing in her hand. Across the yard, the oak tree Ben planted the year they bought the house swayed gently. She remembered Emily climbing that tree, how she once named each branch after her favorite books. What had happened to that girl? When had entitlement replaced affection? She thought of replying. Just one line. "I was wondering the same thing about you." Or maybe, "Is that all I am to you now?" But her fingers didn't move. Instead, she placed the phone screen down on the table beside her. Let them wait. Let them wonder. They'd gone silent for a year. Surely they could manage a few days more. It wasn't about revenge. Lillian didn't want payback. She wanted truth. She wanted memory. She wanted someone to remember that she wasn't born holding a will. She was born holding people, feeding them, loving them, forgiving them. And now, when the bank accounts were more important than the birthdays, when they counted dollars instead of dinners, now they were reaching out not to reconnect, to claim. To confirm. To secure what they thought was theirs. But it wasn't theirs. It had never been promised, and more importantly, it was not earned. She stood and walked back inside by the time she returned to the kitchen. The message had been marked red. A second one followed. "Did we do something wrong?" "Just be honest." She didn't reply. Not yet. Because the answer wasn't simple. The answer wasn't one sentence or one guilt-soaked emoji. The answer lived in pie crusts made from scratch, in birthday cards handpicked every year, in scraped knees, bandaged in school plays attended. The answer was her life. And one day, maybe they'd understand what they threw away, not because she said it, but because they'd feel it in the silence, in the empty seat at the table, in the legacy that didn't include them. Not out of malice, but out of memory. Because memory doesn't lie. It just waits to be honored. The bell above the glass door jingled softly as Lillian stepped inside. The scent of old carpet and lemon polish greeted her, unchanged for decades. The receptionist looked up and smiled. "Ms. Lillian, he's expecting you." Lillian nodded politely, gripping her worn leather folder with both hands. Her steps were slower than they used to be, but steady, the kind of steadiness you earn by staying upright in the storms no one sees. Down the hall. Second door on the left, she knocked once. "Come in," a familiar voice called. James C. Harlan. Esque, now grayer and more hunched than she remembered, rose halfway from his chair when he saw her. "Lillian, it's been too long." She smiled faintly. "Too long, yes? But not too late." He gestured to the seat across from him. "Still carrying the same folder?" She placed it gently on the desk. "Still holds the same truth." He opened it with the care of someone handling both paper and pain. Inside were the documents they'd signed nearly 15 years ago. A joint estate plan written when Ben was still alive. And when the grandkids were still babies who colored her porch with sidewalk chalk. "I've read it front to back," he said. "What are we adjusting today?" She took a breath. "I want to remove all 3 grandchildren from the will." James blinked. "All 3. She nodded. "I'm reallocating everything to a scholarship fund for women over 60 going back to school, starting new businesses, or doing something bold. Something they weren't allowed to do when they were younger." He didn't argue, just leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "They cut me out," she added. "Blocked my number. Didn't visit, didn't write. And then they had the gall to ask about the inheritance as if it was their birthright. Did they ever explain?" She looked out the window. "No, they just assumed I'd stay quiet." James reached for his pen. "You're sure?" Her voice didn't tremble. "It's not revenge," she said. "It's a correction." Silence settled over the office. A different kind of silence than the one that haunted her. Thanksgiving table. This one held respect, intention, power. He began drafting the changes as he typed. She reflected on the years when she made excuses for them. How she told friends, "Oh, they're just busy," or "kids these days, you know?" But she knew. And now she was done pretending they'd come back as the people she once knew. "They act like I owe them something," she said quietly. "But I've already paid. I paid in bedtime stories and second jobs and missed doctor appointments so they could have braces. I paid in love they never returned." James looked up. "I don't think I've ever seen you like this." She tilted her head. "Like what?" "Certain." She smiled. "That's what happens when the last door you were waiting to open finally stays shut." He returned to the document. They adjusted the trust, removed each grandchild, assigned the new funds to the scholarship program she'd been dreaming about but never prioritized. When the final clause was typed, he passed it to her for review. She read every word slowly, not because she didn't trust him, but because she owed it to herself to see it, to witness her own change, to witness her own power. When she was done, she signed. The pen didn't shake. He slid a notarization form across the desk. "You know, this might cause a stir," he said. "I'm not afraid of noise anymore," she replied. He smiled. They sat for a few more moments in quiet companionship. Then James walked her to the door. At the threshold, she paused. "You've known me a long time," she said. "Since you were pregnant with Emily." He nodded. She looked up at him. "Do you think I'm being cruel?" He didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "I think you're finally remembering that your life belongs to you." She exhaled, almost like she'd been holding that breath for a year. Outside, the wind had picked up. The walk back to the car was slow, but her feet felt lighter. Her hands too, even though the folder was still tucked under her arm. That night, she sat in her armchair, tea in hand, and reread the updated will. No guilt came, no second guessing, only relief. She looked at the empty chair across from her and whispered to Ben, "They forgot who I was." But I didn't. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like he heard her. The invitation had come in a hand-delivered envelope. It wasn't fancy, just cream-colored. Paper with a gold stamp of the town's library. Inside a note, "We'd be honored if you'd attend the annual community dinner this Friday, where we'd like to recognize your gift to the Silver Root Scholarship Fund. Your kindness has already changed lives." Lillian had read it twice before folding it back neatly. Friday came. She wore a navy cardigan with pearl buttons, the same one she'd worn to Emily's high school graduation years ago. She pinned her hair back and added her late husband's cufflink to her handbag, the one with the engraved B, small armor. The hall was warm with string lights and the smell of cinnamon rolls. Folding chairs lined long tables. Laughter, clinking forks, murmurs of gratitude. She took her seat quietly when the speaker stood. He began reading aloud letters from women who had applied for the scholarship. Older women, grandmothers, divorces. Women who had spent decades taking care of others and were now, finally, taking care of themselves. Your gift didn't just create a scholarship, the speaker said. It created a second chance for women who were once told their time had passed. Lillian looked down at her folded hands. For the first time in months, they weren't trembling, people clapped. Some stood. She was asked to say a few words, but she simply nodded and mouthed, "Thank you." No performance. No spectacle, just truth. That night, someone snapped a photo of her smiling with the library board. Another of her talking to a younger woman with graying temples and calloused hands. The next morning, the local paper ran the story online. Widow redirects entire estate to fund education for women over 60. "We were invisible once," she said. "Now we're not." It was shared hundreds of times. Eventually, the grandkids saw it. It started with Liam, the oldest, sending a text from yet another new number. "Liam, Grandma, just saw the article. What is going on? You're giving everything away?" She stared at it for a long time. An hour later came one from Emily. "Emily, we didn't know you were serious. Thought you were just upset. Why didn't you tell us?" And finally, Jonah. "Jonah, please respond. We didn't mean to make you feel like this. We were just busy. Everyone's been stressed." 3 messages. No apologies. No, "How are you?" Just panic wrapped in mild regret. She placed the phone face down. They were surprised. Not that they hurt her, but that she had acted on it. They assumed she'd wait, that she'd sit in her house staring at the door. Hoping for them to knock. They never imagined the door would close and lock. Without a sound, she made herself tea, read the paper, went for a walk. Later that evening, she opened her journal. Not to write back, but to reread her sticky note. Read this again before forgiving. She did, and she didn't reply. The knock was hesitant. 3 soft taps, like someone testing the wind. Lillian opened the door slowly. It was her daughter, Marianne, standing in a gray cardigan and holding her phone like a peace offering. "I should have called." "First," she said quietly. Lillian stepped aside. The house smelled like lemon balm and old books. The heater hummed in the corner. Marianne hadn't been here in months, maybe longer, and yet she walked in like it was yesterday. Like she remembered where the tea mugs were and which chair creaked when you leaned too far back. "They're upset," she said. "Not sitting yet. I showed them the article and the will." Lillian stayed silent. She motioned toward the kitchen table. Marianne sat. She looked older than the last time, not in the face, but in the eyes. Worn in a different way. "They didn't mean to ignore you," she said, placing her phone on the table. "It's just life happened. They're young, busy, selfish sometimes. But they're not bad kids." Lillian poured tea for both of them. She stirred hers slowly. "You said the same thing about their father once," she said gently. "Busy, selfish, not bad." Marianne blinked. Silence wrapped around them like a second skin. "They're not asking for the money," Marianne continued. "Not now. They're just hurt, shocked, confused." Lillian stood and walked to her writing desk. She opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a manila envelope, thick, crisp. She laid it on the table, untouched. "This is the final version," she said. Marianne didn't move. "They're not in it," Lillian continued. "Neither are you." The words didn't sting. They didn't accuse. They were simply the weather, cold, inevitable. Marianne's eyes filled. "I didn't block your number," she said. Lillian nodded. "But you didn't call either." A pause. "You raised them," Lillian said, tapping the envelope once. "But I raised you. You knew better." The sentence was not said with anger. It was said with mourning. Marianne's breath caught. "I thought you were fine," she whispered. "You've always been so strong. I didn't think that I could be forgotten," Lillian asked, "or that I would notice." Marianne wiped at her cheek. She didn't reach for the envelope. "It's not about the will," she finally said. "I know." Lillian replied. Marianne looked around the room at the framed photographs of her childhood. The needlepoint sampler Lillian had stitched the year her husband died. The empty chair across the room that still leaned slightly to the left. "You made this place feel like home," she said. Lillian smiled faintly. And yet no one came home. They sat in silence. Outside, the wind moved through the bare trees. Winter was on its way. But inside, the room was warm, steady, unshaken. "I don't want money," Marianne said. "I want to know I didn't lose you." "You didn't," Lillian said softly. "But they did." Marianne nodded. Tears rolled again, but not for inheritance. Not for loss of assets, for a deeper loss of time. Of stories never asked. Of birthdays left uncalled. Of a woman who once carried them all and had learned, finally, to carry herself instead. "I'm sorry," Marianne whispered. "I know," Lillian said. "That's why I opened the door." They didn't hug. Not yet. But something settled in the room. A stillness that felt almost like forgiveness. Almost when Marianne left. She didn't ask about the contents of the will again. She just said, "I'll come by next Sunday." "If that's okay." Lillian smiled. "We'll see if the pie turns out right." The morning sun filtered gently through the apple tree's thinning branches, scattering dappled shadows across the garden soil. Lillian sat on the wooden bench her husband had built 3 decades ago. Worn soft by time and memory, in her lap rested a new leather-bound journal, uncreased, unsigned, unapologetic. She opened to the first page. No date. Just silence and the wind brushing her cheeks like a hand she used to know. She held her favorite pen. Not for nostalgia, but for declaration. Today, she wasn't writing to her grandkids. Or to Marianne. Not even to her late husband. She was writing to herself. "Dear Lillian, you are not forgotten. You are not less. You are not what they didn't see." She paused. A single bird chirped, then stopped, as if offering space for her next thought. "You gave them years. Soft hands. Open doors. Birthday cakes. Picked up calls. Answered questions. Quiet forgiveness. Loud laughter. And in the end, they answered you with absence." She didn't write it in bitterness. She wrote it in truth, uncoded, undiminished. "They blocked your number, but you were never trying to be reached. You only ever wanted to be remembered." She looked up, a leaf golden and veined, let go from the tallest branch. It floated, spun slowly, then landed on her journal. She smiled. The garden had changed in recent years. Weeds in places she hadn't noticed before. Bushes trimmed too late. Some soil left dry too long. But still, it lived. Just like her. Not flawless. Not untouched, but rooted. She continued writing. "This is not a story about loss. Not truly. It's a story about learning to sit at your own table. Even when no one sets a place for you. It's about knowing that silence isn't the end. Sometimes it's where healing starts." She thought of the Thanksgiving plates she once set untouched. The birthday voicemails unheard. The letter she never mailed, unread, all of it. And still, she was here whole when she finished writing. She signed it simply, with love. The kind you never owed anyone, Lillian. She placed the pen down with care. No rush, no need to return calls that never came. No urgency to justify her heart. She stood, slow but steady, and walked to the back of the garden where her husband's old rosebush had bloomed again this year. Kneeling, she buried a small envelope near its roots. Her original will. Folded in half, it wasn't needed anymore. The real legacy lived somewhere else now, in pages. In scholarships, in second chances for women she'd never meet. But deeply understood back on the porch. She poured herself tea, not waiting for visitors, just watching the wind gather the fallen leaves, guilt, regret, old ache, and carry them far. Far away, she picked up her new will, handwritten, tucked it inside the back cover of her journal. Final line read. They called it the end of my story. But that was only their chapter. She closed the journal, held it to her chest, and for the first time in a long while, she felt seen, not by others, but by herself, the most important witness of all.